Hello, my name is Eno Little.
And I'm Clementine Parlberg.
We are both students in the documentary photography class taught by Professor Nolan at Bates College.
Over the past few months, we have analyzed various documentary photos from the Farm Security Administration.
And today, we will be discussing one specific photo, Migrant Family Oklahoma, taken by Arthur Rothstein in 1936, which can be found digitally on the Bates Museum podcast website and linked on the museum podcast page.
In this episode, we will discuss the role of, and ethics behind, documentary photography in reference to the lives of Americans between 1935 and 1943.
The date is December 5th, 2023. The photo we will be talking about today, titled Migrant Family Oklahoma, was taken by Rothstein as a part of a commissioned project organized by the Farm Security Administration in 1936.
The Farm Security Administration was a New Deal agency that oversaw the creation of over 77,000 photographs and was active through 1946.
Right. And what was the importance of the FSA? Why was it created?
The government organization fell under the umbrella of FDR's Work Progress Administration. It was responsible for the commissioning of photographers such as Arthur Rothstein, Dorothea Lange, and Walker Evans to capture life in America during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl.
So the photographs from various photographers captured in the American Midwest and American South were sent to the editors at the FSA, such as Roy Stryker, who would make the final decision on which photos were published to the American people.
Correct. It was the goal of the U.S. government to provide the American people with photographic examples of the living conditions of the time.
And we can understand that there are various personal connections within the FSA as well, right? Most obviously, that Roy Stryker, who was the editor for the FSA project, taught at Columbia University, where he instructed Arthur Rothstein, who would later be involved with the FSA project alongside Stryker. So we know the U.S. government commissioned the photographs in order to inform the American people about life during the Great Depression, but what were some of the extraneous circumstances behind these documents?
Well, it's important to give background on when this photograph was taken. There was a drought in 1930, and as a result of the lack of precipitation and poor farming methods, the grounds of the Great Plains were barren. This caused the wind to lift dirt and debris up off the ground and sweep it across the panhandle. Clouds of dust to darken the sky and cover people's homes and farms. These devastating conditions forced families, many of whom were migrant workers, to flee westward.
As far as you could see, there was a dust storm coming right towards you. This giant wall just coming towards you. And you still had the feeling, whether you would admit it, that something was going to run over you and just crush you.
A total of 400,000 people fled the Great Plains in search of homes, food, and work.
The Dust Bowl wasn't the only thing leaving families searching for food and work.
The Great Depression hit Oklahoma around the same time as the drought, in 1930.
Right, and when the Dust Bowl hit, the economy tanked, causing 300,000 people to become unemployed. It was basically a worst-case scenario for the American Midwest.
Looking back on it, I think it carried with it a feeling of almost being evil.
And those two clips you just heard were from the Ken Burns documentary The Dust Bowl, which was made in 2012. And they were from Floyd Cohen from Morton County, Kansas, and Dorothy Williamson from Prowers County, Colorado. And they were both talking about their experiences living through the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. And we can see from documentaries such as these that the Dust Bowl not only brought on environmental challenges on Americans, but extreme financial hardship as well.
Correct. According to the Oklahoma Historical Society, farm income in rural areas fell 64% in the 1930s. This affected over 1.5 million people, leaving families desperate for food.
Right, and many families moved into more urban areas of the state, hoping to find work. However, many left the state altogether, leading to a population decline of 15 to 18% through the 1930s.
It's likely that the family depicted in Rothstein's photograph was fleeing the harsh living conditions brought on by the Depression and Dust Bowl.
Right, and it was the goal of the FSA to employ photographers to capture the families living through the Dust Bowl and Great Depression in an effort to educate the rest of America about the Midwest. In a 1977 interview with Rothstein by Richard Dowd, Rothstein explained that Roy Stryker sent him to capture the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. Rothstein said, quote, "I lived in the Dust Bowl for several months and went out every day and took pictures."
Yes, and in discussing his role in the FSA, Rothstein talked about the importance of photojournalism in the interview as well. He said that a photographer has, quote, "a great deal of responsibility to the readers," and that a photographer has to make pictures that are honest and truthful.
Right. So it's clear that it was the goal of Stryker and Rothstein to create a truthful representation of life in the Midwest. Yet, as consumers of his photography, we must continue to question if Rothstein and the FSA used ethical methods of photography.
In Rothstein's Migrant Family Oklahoma, there's a family of 6, a mother and what we assume to be her 5 children, depicted outside of their car.
Captured in black and white, the photograph contains stark contrasts between the dark shade of the car and the vast field seen behind where the family is posed. Although the background is slightly darker and shaded, we can still tell that there are few buildings and trees.
This is an intricate photograph to study because each family member's facial expression tells a different story.
Right. The child on the bottom right of the image is smiling and staring directly into the camera, while the child on the bottom left looks uncomfortable and perhaps even a little scared.
The rest of the family exists within this frame within a frame that Rothstein creates with the car door and window.
Yeah, the car door is open, and within the frame of the open window, the mother and 2 of the children are positioned away from the rest of the family. It's as if the door in the frame acts as a shield that the family hides behind.
Right. And it's important to mention that the only girl smiling, who we mentioned just now, is also the only subject located in front of the door, closest to Rothstein in the photograph.
Yes, and there are many things we could hypothesize to be the reason for the positioning of the family and their different facial expressions. For example, the family could feel somewhat uncomfortable with Rothstein's presence, as he is a complete stranger with a camera. It could also be the case that they are living out of their car, which would make Rothstein's photograph even more personal, given that he is positioning them in their home. But aside from their facial expressions, there are also many other aspects of the photograph that tell us a little more about the time in which it was captured, right?
Yes, we can see that all the subjects in the frame, which coincidentally are all women, have shorter hair, which could suggest that they all spend time working, given that longer hair is harder to manage.
Right, and although this is a theory, it sort of checks out, given that we know the family is a migrant family from the title, which means they have moved in search of work.
Yes, and I think it is important to mention that because there is so little information about the subjects in Rothstein's photograph, and in the larger FSA collection for that matter, that much of our observations are very theoretical.
Right, and in noting that inherent aspect of evaluating documentary images, you also bring up the point that there is a certain mystery attached to each image.
Yes, there are definitely mysteries when it comes to Migrant Family Oklahoma.
For example, there appears to be what looks like a tuft of hair on the leftmost side of the frame.
It is difficult to tell whether or not it is in fact someone's hair. Yet, in noticing this part of the photograph, we are thrown down a rabbit hole of questions, like, if it is another subject, why are they not included in the frame? Could that missing subject be the father of the children?
Right, and these questions will be important to think about as we discuss other photos from within the FSA collection and from other photographers later in the podcast. When I first looked at the photograph, Migrant Family Oklahoma, my eye was immediately drawn to the scene in the car window.
Yeah, me too.
At first glance, the mother appears to be seated in the back seat with the youngest girl sitting on her lap.
The young girl is most likely around the age of 5 or 6, and is brandishing a pair of large silver scissors. Her small hand, just visible through the glass, appears wrapped tightly around the blade of the scissors, as opposed to the handle, and her face displays an almost territorial expression.
Right, And this feeling of the frame being somewhat of a territorial space is important when it comes to other narratives surrounding Migrant Family Oklahoma that we may not see, and which we will also discuss later in the podcast.
Right, and in thinking of the photographic frame as what we are calling a territorial space, we begin to question certain aspects of not only Rothstein's photograph, but many other forms of documents as well.
Yes. When it comes to Migrant Family Oklahoma, we can begin to ask questions like, why did Rothstein pose the subjects in such a way? Does the fact that they are posed decry the truth value of the image? These are some questions that address the ethical dilemmas surrounding not only documentary photography, but photography in general.
Right, and other FSA photographers such as Dorothea Lange face similar ethical dilemmas of respecting their subjects, as Rothstein did when it came to their photography.
Yes. For example, Migrant Mother by Lange, which is arguably one of the most well-known photographs from the FSA collection, depicts a mother with a ragged look of concern sitting with two of her children, both with their heads buried in her shoulders. This famous photograph sheds light on some of the ethical concerns we've been talking about in regards to photography.
In an interview with Lange regarding the photograph, she said that, quote, "I did not ask her name or her history. She told me her age, that she was 32. It wasn't until 40 years later that the name of the mother in the photograph, Florence Owens Thompson, was revealed."
Right, and this means that Thompson became this iconic representation of motherhood during the Great Depression, and yet she did not receive any monetary compensation for the photograph.
Correct.
In our research on Migrant Family Oklahoma, it was difficult to find information concerning the subjects who posed for Rothstein that day, and thus we are left with questions about their identities. What was the specific family's life like after the photograph was taken? Did they ever see it after it was published? Did they want to be photographed in the first place? What were their names and their ages?
Yes, and in examining this dilemma within documentary photography, a reoccurring theme emerges. While Lange was commissioned for her work, Thompson and her children did not receive any benefits from Lange's photograph.
Right, and within these kinds of exploitive documentary images, there are also other reoccurring themes as well.
In many iconic documentary images, the symbol of the woman, specifically the mother, seems to be common.
Right, and for example, in the case of Madonna and Child, taken by Lewis Hine on Ellis Island in 1908, we again see a mother portrayed with her young daughter who likely did not receive any benefits from being photographed.
It is unclear why exactly this phenomenon occurs. According to Southwestern University, an iconic image, by definition, is, quote, recognized by everyone within a public culture, as well as having attributes of strong emotional identification or response.
So it's possible to say that there is something about the depiction of the mother in Lange's photograph and the mother in Hine's photograph that evokes emotion within the American people.
Right, and a similar emotional response is present in Rothstein's Migrant Family Oklahoma, which is partially what makes the photograph so impactful.
Many of the FSA photographers attempted to capture the authentic familial relationships to draw viewers closer to their work. However, in doing so, privacy was often invaded, and real people became more symbols of the terrible events that swept through the Midwest during the 1930s and 40s.
As constant consumers and viewers of photography, we must continue to question the truth value and ethics of documentary photography around us. Rothstein's work and other FSA photography can help inform our critiques of pictures today.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Once again, I'm Eno Little.
I'm Clementine Parlberg.
We hope that our analysis on photography and documentary photography today provided a little bit of a different perspective for our listeners, and we hope that you go check out the other podcasts from this class on the Bates Museum podcast website.